Hello and welcome back to Physical Geology Lab for Geologic Time. So today I'm going to go through pages 110 and 116, and that's part of the lab that I want you to do for this week. Now the first page here deals with these relative time principles. I talk about them in my video lectures, and in class I've talked about them a little bit, and we really want to get proficient, get good at understanding and deciphering these geologic puzzles. So I call these geologic puzzles because your job is to figure out the sequence of events, the order of events, the stratigraphy, how the strata is graphed from oldest to youngest. So we have the oldest events, which is going to be number 1, and the young event is going to be number 10 up here. Now also this erosion R and faulting U, those are events. So we have to include those in our stratigraphy, our column here. So for example, erosion R is going to be some sort of unconformity. And here we see a good example of parallel units on both sides of the unconformity. Based on the tutorial we just did, the geologic time tutorial, you should know what this unconformity is. So I'll let you answer that question. But one thing to note here is not every unit on all sides is labeled, but we can sort of figure that out. We know that the oldest unit must be E down at the bottom here, and then above E is B, so here we'd have to add B here. Then we have G above B, put G there, then F, and then we have C, which is sort of this sandstone here. And note that over here I have H, so H must be above this C, so that'd be H right there, right? So that'd be C. And this would be our F, G, and below G is B, and then a little bit down here, there's some E over here as well. So anyways, using that, so the first thing you'll use is use a principle of superposition to work your way. So it's going to be pretty easy. Essentially, E through H is going to be all in order, right? Because we're just using superposition here. 6 units, all using superposition, the principle of superposition, to organize them. Now the next thing is your job is to figure out, well, is this fault U next, or is it the unconformity here, unconformity erosion R? So your job is to figure that out. Then obviously once you do 7 and 8, the unconformity and the faulting, then 9 and 10 will be DNA. So that'll be pretty easy. And that's kind of what I want you to do, is start thinking about the sequence of events. Obviously, to decipher the faulting U and the erosion R, you need to use a principle of cross-cutting relations. And then you can answer these questions down below. So kind of, we've sort of started number 1 here. We sequencing these events in order. Now, based on the type of unconformity, name it. Right? Is it an angular unconformity, a nonconformity, or is it a disconformity? And then in my video lectures, I talk about Steno. And remember, Nicola Steno in 1669 wrote a paper on the geology of Florence, and he basically contributed the first 3 geologic principles, right? So you can look at your video lecture notes for the answer to this question. And then the geologist introduced the principle of cross-cutting relations. Well, that would be the same person who wrote this book, The Principles of Geology. So again, look at your lecture notes and my video lectures, and you'll get the answer to these questions. There's another person, a different person, who didn't write this book, but who introduces principle of uniformitarianism. And so that's one of the fathers of geology. So look up in my video lectures for the answer to this question on uniformitarianism. And then finally, Darwin on his voyage used this book. And you may not get it from my video lectures, but I think I do talk about it. But really what the principles of geology did is the author, in this case, I'll just tell you, Charles Lyell. Lyell championed this idea of uniformitarianism, kind of this slow rate of processes that lead to geologic units and formations and erosions and all that, all those unconformities. So this principle really underscores the length of geologic time and a very old Earth. And so one of Darwin's problems, and for him to formulate his idea of organic evolution, he needed lots of time. Right? Remember, the Bible only gave him about 6,000 years, so he couldn't do it in 6,000 years. So principle of geology gave him millions of years, right? So again, remember, the book was written in 1830. Darwin started his voyage in 1833. All right, so you can answer those questions there. Then on this next page, I want you to, and you can just look this up, but it's good practice to start writing, kind of get an idea of these different units and the geologic time scale. Remember, the geologic column is really a sequence of, if you can get all the rock units laid down in order from oldest to youngest, you would make this geologic column. Obviously, no place on Earth has a complete record of Earth history, so we have to use correlation again between continents, between different regions, to establish a complete geologic column. And so here I've written it out for you here. Again, you can look it up in your book or online. One thing I want to point out here is for the Cenozoic, there's really only 3 periods. I have an extra space in here. So the Quaternary is really this whole time right here. It includes the Pleistocene and the Holocene epochs. So you'll want to fill these out. And then the next thing that I have here, note that I have these range zones. And these ranges represent the time where different species first appeared in the fossil record and when they go extinct. So for example, reptiles first appeared in the Carboniferous, the Pennsylvanian period here, and have continued on to the present. So they're still around today, right? Same thing with amphibians, right? So here sharks and amphibians started here in the Devonian period, and they've continued on to the present, right? So that's what I want you to do with this next page over here. Note that I have the ranges of all these different organisms. For example, I didn't do them all. I started doing some of these older ones, especially I did this column here. So SB for the Strophomenia brachiopods, OTR for the Oleonellus trilobites, Elrathia trilobites. So you'll see that I have OTR for Oleonellus trilobite. There's Elrathia trilobite. So I've spaced out their timelines or their ranges based on what I've read, what I've gotten over here. So early Cambrian for Oleonellus. So you can see it's early Cambrian there, and Elrathia is late Cambrian. This SB Strophomenia brachiopods, well, they're only in their Ordovician, so I have them spanning the whole Ordovician. So I want you to do something like this, and notice that I only went up to, I think I went up just to the reptiles. I didn't do any of this first column here. So you'll have to add these fossils to your geologic column. And note that you might run out of space, so you can actually do it off to the side over here, or even off on the margin over here to add those different fossils. And like I did, you can make acronyms or shorten the name up here to make it fit. So if they're really long ranges, you can actually put the whole word in there. All right, so I want you to do that. That'll complete this part of the assignment, which is dealing with these range zones. You'll see later on that we're going to look at these in more detail, especially coming up here in this next part. So when we're looking at the second part of page 112 of the organisms we just plotted up here, which ones would be good index fossils? So we talked about index fossils in the tutorial, right? So remember, they have a wide distribution, a short geologic time range, and they're easy to identify. So of those, pick out some good index fossils, maybe 2 or 3. You don't need to pick out probably no more than that. See, again, you're looking at the distribution of these fossils here to answer this question here, number 1. Now for this next part, we're going to be looking, and I did post the PDF of this lab in this assignment, so you can see the colored picture. And so here we have 2 fossils, right? So your job is to identify these fossils, and I did include on the next page a geologic column with fossils and their range zones. For example, here's Oleonellus, again, early Cambrian, right? So it has a very short range zone. In fact, here they go a little bit more detail. Oleonellus trilobites really only existed between 520 and 515 million years ago. So they have a very narrow range zone. And they're really good index fossils for the early Cambrian. Now, in our assignment here, your job is to identify these fossils. So if we place our rock here, so this rock that we have has these 2 fossils. Note that one thing I want to point out is that this trilobite has this really large nose. And when I look at all these other trilobites, all these Cambrian trilobites and the Ordovician trilobites, they have small noses, but the only big one is Phacops. So it looks like this trilobite is Phacops. So you'd write the name of the fossil there. And then the other fossil is this one here. And we've looked at this one a little bit in the previous geologic time tutorial, that would be this Macrospirifera, right? So we'll add this guy here. So those are our two fossils that are included in this rock, right? Now, based on the overlapping of the range zones, what is the relative age of this rock? So they want the relative age. So they want basically early, middle, late, and then whatever part of the period it belongs to. So one thing that I do, and you can use a ruler for this, is since we have Thacops and Macrospirifera, note that we want to figure out where the ranges overlap. So if I draw a line at the base of Macrospirifera here, and I go out Devonian there, and then I see that they both kind of end at the same time. In fact, I want to pick the top of Thacops here, so right in here. And so it looks like for both these fossils, the time based on their overlapping range zones, because they both coexisted at this interval of time, it would be middle to late Devonian. So on our sheet here, we would put middle to late Devonian. So it would be the Devonian period, middle to late Devonian. Because we have dates of rocks that bracket these fossils, radiometric dates, we can actually get an absolute age in millions of years before present. And so when we look at this, we see that it's going to be between 397 and about, it looks like 359, the end of the Devonian. So 397 to 359. And that would be the answers to this question. So a rock containing these two fossils, Macrospirifera and Thacops trilobites, would have an age of around 397 to 359 million years old, and it'd be middle to late Devonian. So on the next page, we have a similar two other pictures of fossils. The key thing about this guy right here, this guy really is a long fossil. It's actually an ammonoid fossil. It's a squid. A little squid would be living up here. But note the sutures on it. And so its unusual sutures will give you an idea what it is. And here's a bivalve that really has kind of this corkscrew shape. So there's two fossils in here. So again, you want to use your column here to identify what those two fossils are. They're going to be somewhere in the Mesozoic. And then do the same thing. Based on the overlapping range zones, figure out their relative age, whether it's early, late, middle, or late Cretaceous, or whatever period you're looking at. And then do the same in terms of millions of years before present for the absolute age. And then finally, the third one, you're looking at a different trilobite and a different type of brachiopod. So these are two fossils, a trilobite and a brachiopod. Again, looking at the column over here, try to figure out what two fossils they are, what trilobite and what brachiopod. So obviously it's going to be something down here in the Paleozoic era. And then finally, this next one for question number 5 is looking at a hypothetical column with some fossils. Note that unit C has the Oleonellus fossil, and unit D has the Thacops fossil. So Oleonellus and Thacops. And so in there, in this, even though you don't notice it, there's some sort of disconformity. Remember, the disconformity is an erosion event that occurs where there are parallel layers of sedimentary rocks on both sides of the unconformity. So your job is, based on these fossils, where is that unconformity, right? Because when we look over here at Oleonellus is in the Cambrian, but Thacops is way up here in the late Silurian to Devonian, right? So there's a time gap missing there. In fact, it even says there's a whole system. So what it means by system, it means a geologic period. What period is missing at the disconformity? Is it the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, or Devonian? What's missing? So your job is to label the period or system that's missing in this column here, right? So that's what it's referring to right there for question number 5.